So I'm finally back after a hectic couple of weeks in London, playing poker almost every day. It was great fun, but I'm also excited to get back to all the things I do in normal life. That is at least for a few weeks until EPT Vienna starts at the end of the month. I'll never pretend that live poker is anything other than great fun and a ridiculously lucky thing to be able to do it at least as part of your living. But if there is one downside, it's the fact that everyone, I guess, to some extent, has to go through a dry spell at some point. It looked like my timing could be really unfortunate and that a reasonably long dry spell could materialise for the whole of the time in London, which would have been a pretty gunning thing. And so the EPT main event started off just as the World Series main event had finished, and that was with disappointment. The 2 days of the main events were actually very similar, actually both within a few minutes of the end of day one, after a day which felt like I was banging my head against the brick wall a bit and just running into a series of mini coolers, nothing too awful or too interesting, but just little cooler after time after time after time. The disappointment on days like that is that you can't go away from the table thinking there's honestly nothing I could have done, the deck was against me. There will always be a couple of pots which play in your mind which maybe you could have done a little bit better, so that on a day where luck was offering you no way out, at least some really good play could have possibly offered you a way out. At the same time, I didn't feel that I played too bad, and that possibly there wasn't too much I could have done on those days. Not getting knocked out of the EPT London will always be a big disappointment because it's the home one, but there would come some consolation in a really sick schedule of side events. Those didn't start well. I busted the 1K round of each tournament on the first day. And so we would come down to the last event, the 2K Hold'em event. I had some luck in this tournament, which was just as well, because the field, surprisingly, was one of the most ridiculously good fields I've ever seen. I couldn't quite figure out why, but I had to spend most of the day as one of the oldest at the table, which is always quite funny now, with players like Lucky Chewy and Annette, who I could swear is just on a different level to everyone else. But fortunately enough, good cards took me through the first day, raced me through the second, and I would find myself on the 8-handed final table with just about average in chips. It's always really exciting to make a final table, but just particularly sweet when it comes at the end of a disappointing run. Actually, there's nothing like scoring an equaliser, and this felt like my equaliser against the previous disappointments of London. The final table would be just as sick. We would have Liv Boeree, Nicholas Chowsky, the Monte Carlo winner, Jens Thorsen, who's the younger brother of William Thorsen, and my good friend Jake, who is in the process of crushing the whole poker world at the moment, and a bunch of other players who were pretty good, who I don't remember offhand. There would be one really interesting hand and only one hand which left me with slight regrets at the end of the day. It came against Jens Thorsen, the eventual winner, when we were 6-handed. I raised the hijack with King 7 off and he peeled the small blind. We saw a flop of Ace of Hearts, 2 of Hearts, 3 of Diamonds, which was obviously a complete miss for me. It felt like I should fire one shot of a certified 70k into 30, which he pretty quickly called. The turn actually came the gin card for me, as it came the 7 of Hearts, putting a 3rd heart on board, and I had the King of Hearts in my hand for the 2nd flush draw. He checks, and it feels natural to check behind in this spot, because obviously there's not too much I can bluff off, and there's a lot of ways I can improve on the river. But you should never do so automatically. Maybe it could be a good spot to bluff. I thought about it for a long time. The big question in this spot is when you hold second pair, it's a pretty narrow range that you're bluffing off, but I thought there was a decent chance of getting off a likely Ace-Jack or Ace-10 if he didn't hold the Jack or 10 of Hearts. And obviously if I do get called in that spot, I go to the river with decent equity anyway. The big danger is that we were now only playing 150k into a 50k pot, so I might offer him a check raise all in, and it was that made me maybe just slightly wimp out and check behind. The river looked innocuous, it was a blank queen, obviously a disappointment. It turned out to be more of a disappointment than it seemed, because he actually just had king-queen off suits, having floated the flop out of position. And so my unlikely card on the turn actually gave me a pretty unbeatable lead, and he caught just one of his 3 outs to win. However, I could only assume that if he's calling with king-queen out position on the flop, then he may well be floating and barreling that river big. And actually that's another reason why I should barrel the turn, because it at least gets me to showdown and denies him the opportunity to make some kind of bluff on the end, which is going to be pretty hard for me to call because it looks like a believable line. Anyway, that was the interesting hand. Apart from that, I got into a whole series of races. I think I won about half of them, lost the crucial one, which was the last one to Liv Boeree, and actually the last but one as well, but my luck all in all was pretty fair, and I exited in 5th place. A disappointing place to go out when the prize money skipped up after that, but I've never cared too much about the money in live poker. and it was really nice to get a good run and a decent result. It felt like an equaliser on the kind of third quarter of the poker year. The first quarter with Helsinki and Coventry went pretty well. Vegas was good, and so it would have been a big disappointment had the third quarter ended with nothing. And it wasn't a spectacular one, but it's nice at least to make it into a kind of a half decent one. And so now I'll be excited for the fourth quarter. There's not one big event, but there's the classic events of Amsterdam, say the Blackpool GKBT, the GKBT final, and EPTs, which go next to Vienna and Barcelona, which I'll really look forward to. There's lots more poker to come, and so there'll be more updates to come. Until then, goodbye.